To understand Paris in the 18th century is to read its architecture like a historical ledger. The city was not built in a single era. Rather, it was a living, breathing organism where medieval fortresses cast shadows over Enlightenment coffeehouses. As the 1700s unfolded, every stone, bridge, and plaza served a specific, often conflicting purpose. Some to enforce absolute royal authority, others to facilitate commerce, and still others to foster the dangerous new ideas of human liberty. To walk the streets of 18th century Paris was to navigate a sensory assault. Away from the manicured geometric perfection of the royal squares, the true metropolis was a dark, twisting labyrinth of medieval alleyways. There were no sidewalks. The streets were notoriously paved with a slick, foul-smelling mud, a mixture of dirt, horse dung, and human waste, emptied directly from upper-story windows. The cacophony was deafening, the clatter of iron-rimmed carriage wheels threatening to crush pedestrians against the walls, the cries of thousands of street vendors selling everything from roasted chestnuts to rat poison, and the constant tolling bells of the city's countless churches. Danger was ever present, and the justice of the streets was swift and brutal. The royal police force, known as the Get, patrolled this chaos in stark blue uniforms. Their mandate was to enforce order upon an increasingly desperate population. By 1745, it was a common, grim sight to see these guards transporting wooden carts filled with destitute women, accused of prostitution or vagrancy, destined for the dreaded hospital prison of the Salpêtrière. It was a city that ruthlessly swept its poorest citizens into the shadows to maintain the illusion of imperial grace. The social hierarchy of Paris was not just divided by neighborhoods, it was built into the very architecture of its houses. Because the city was confined by its walls, it could not expand outward. It had to build upward. A single townhouse often contained a microcosm of Parisian society. The wealthy elite and bourgeoisie occupied the first floor above the ground, the piano nobile, featuring high ceilings, large windows, and elegant furnishings. As one climbed the narrow, creaking wooden staircases, the social status plummeted. The middle floors housed merchants and clerks, while the very top floors, the garrets tucked directly beneath the sloping slate roofs, were reserved for the city's poorest laborers and servants. These cramped, unventilated rooms were freezing in the winter and suffocatingly hot in the summer. Nowhere was this crisis of housing more terrifyingly evident than on the city's bridges. For most of the century, structures like the Pont au Change and the Pont Notre-Dame were choked with towering multi-story timber houses dangling precariously over the rushing waters of the Seine. These damp, rotting structures were so densely packed that they blocked out the sun. It was only late in the century, culminating in the massive demolition projects of 1786, that the Crown finally cleared the bridges, saving the inhabitants from the constant threat of structural collapse and bringing much-needed air into the city's congested lungs. For the vast majority of Parisians, daily life was defined by back-breaking labor. The city was a booming hub of industry fueled by human sweat. Deep within the working-class districts, massive manufacturing workshops operated in grueling conditions. As meticulously documented in Diderot's Encyclopédie, the paper manufacturing industry required laborers to work in sweltering, toxic environments, transforming rags into the paper that would fuel the era's intellectual awakening. Yet despite their labor, basic survival was a daily struggle. Access to clean water was a relentless challenge. The working poor relied on professional water carriers who hauled heavy wooden buckets from the polluted Seine to the upper floors of tenements. The Crown's attempts at public works were often more insulting than helpful. The monumental Fontaine des Quatre Saisons, completed in 1774, provided a towering, magnificent sculptural facade glorifying the king, but offered only 2 meagre brass spigots for the thousands of thirsty citizens who queued for hours to fill their buckets. The Parisian worker was surrounded by the wealth of an empire, yet starved of its basic necessities. Despite the crushing weight of poverty, the spirit of the Parisian working class was irrepressible. When the grueling workday ended, the city erupted into vibrant, raucous life. Entertainment was a vital psychological release. While the elite attended the Comédie Française or discussed philosophy in the Café de Procope, the common people flooded the Boulevard du Temple. Here, the famous Theatre of Nicolet dazzled crowds in 1786 with acrobats, tightrope walkers, and bawdy pantomimes. The boulevards were a carnival of fire-eaters, trained monkeys, and musicians. Celebration was fiercely communal. Even those tied to the demanding schedules of the aristocracy carved out their own moments of joy. Servants, maids, and cooks organized their own elaborate social events, such as the crowded, exuberant balls held on the Rue du Mont Blanc. In these fleeting hours, the rigid class structures of the city were forgotten in a blur of music, wine, and dancing. Long before the Bourbons took the throne, the Knights Templar constructed the Tower of the Temple as a fortified monastery and financial depository in the 12th century. With its massive, impenetrable stone walls, its original purpose was military and religious defense. However, by the late 18th century, this medieval relic was violently repurposed. It became the ultimate symbol of the monarchy's fall, serving as the grim, high-security prison where King Louis XVI and his family were held in 1795 before their executions. The geographic and historical anchor of Paris is the Île de la Cité, home to the ancient royal palace. Originally built as the primary residence and fortress for the kings of France during the Middle Ages, its purpose evolved over centuries into the seat of the French Parliament and law courts. Even as the monarchy moved to grander palaces, it remained a vital theatre of power. It was from these ancient, imposing gates that a 5-year-old Louis XV made his grand, highly choreographed exit in 1715 to assert his new reign over the nation. Constructed during the 100 Years' War to defend the eastern approach to Paris, the Bastille was originally a formidable military fortress. By the 18th century, however, its military utility had faded, and the Crown had repurposed it as a state prison. It was used to hold political dissidents, often without trial, under the king's direct orders. Though it held few prisoners by 1789, its looming presence made it the ultimate psychological symbol of royal despotism and the primary target for the starving, revolutionary mobs seeking gunpowder on July 14th. As the city's population swelled, the River Seine became a critical axis of daily life and commerce. The Pont Notre Dame, built in the early 1500s, was designed not just as a crossing, but as a densely packed commercial street. It was burdened with tall, precariously built houses and shops that hung directly over the water. Its purpose was to maximize economic space in a walled city, but by 1786, the crushing density and poor sanitation forced the city to demolish these houses, signaling a shift toward modern urban planning. Governance required a localized seat of power, distinct from the king's palaces. The Hôtel de Ville, with its intricate Renaissance facade, was constructed to serve as the administrative headquarters of the Parisian municipality. Seen in its bustling glory in 1740 and 1753, its purpose was to manage the city's overwhelming logistics, from the brutal policing by the blue-uniformed Guard to the regulation of markets. It was the nerve center of civic control, and consequently, the first building seized by rioters during periods of unrest. Despite its name, the New Bridge, the Pont Neuf is the oldest standing bridge in Paris. Unlike the Pont Notre Dame, its revolutionary purpose was to facilitate the unhindered flow of traffic. It was the first bridge built without houses. Anchored by the majestic equestrian statue of Henry IV erected in 1702, the bridge became the teeming, chaotic epicenter of 18th century daily life. By 1763, it functioned as an open-air theatre of society, crowded with hawkers, aristocrats, and street performers. To bring order to the chaotic medieval streets, the Crown introduced the concept of the enclosed residential square. The Place Royale, known today as the Place des Vosges, was completed in 1612. Its strict geometric brick and stone facades and covered arcades were explicitly designed for the aristocracy. Its purpose was to provide a sanitized, highly regulated and exclusive neighborhood where the nobility could live and promenade safely away from the filth and unpredictability of the common masses. Commerce dictated the city's expansion. Rebuilt in stone in the mid-17th century, the Pont au Change served a highly specific economic purpose. It was the designated hub for money changers, goldsmiths, and jewelers. Like the old Pont Notre Dame, it was suffocated by towering structures. In 1756, it remained a claustrophobic, vital financial artery where the immense wealth of the empire changed hands just feet above the rushing river. While kings built squares, the people built sanctuaries for thought. Opened in 1686, the Café de Procope introduced a radical new institution to Paris, the public coffee house. Its purpose was entirely social and intellectual. By 1743, it had become the beating heart of the Enlightenment, a democratic space where rigid class lines blurred in a haze of pipe smoke, allowing philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot to debate science, art, and the dangerous concept of human liberty. In direct contrast to the intellectual freedom of the cafés, the Place des Victoires was constructed for pure ideological submission. Designed as a circular plaza, its sole architectural purpose was to glorify the absolute power of the monarch. Centered around a colossal statue of Louis XIV installed in 1710, the square acted as a monumental piece of state propaganda, forcing every citizen who walked its perimeter to literally look up to the military triumphs of the Sun King. As the 18th century dawned, the physical toll of France's endless wars required a monumental solution. The sweeping complex of Les Invalides, crowned with a gleaming new dome in 1706, was built as a sprawling military hospital and retirement home for wounded veterans. Its purpose was twofold: to provide necessary care for the broken instruments of the King's army, and to project an image of a benevolent, militarily supreme empire to the rest of Europe. Religion remained a foundational pillar of Parisian life, but it was inextricably tied to the state's fluctuating wealth. The colossal church of Saint-Sulpice was intended to be a towering parish church rivaling the grandest cathedrals. Yet its purpose as a symbol of spiritual and civic pride was compromised by the kingdom's financial ruin. Its famously unfinished South Tower, abandoned as it was in 1789, stands as a permanent architectural casualty of a bankrupt regime. Urban design shifted from enclosed royal squares to vast, outward-facing displays of supremacy. The brilliant architect Ange-Jacques Gabriel designed the Place Louis XV, finalized in the 1770s. Its purpose was to serve as a grand open-air vestibule connecting the Tuileries Gardens to the Champs-Élysées, centered around an equestrian statue of the king. Ironically, this sweeping plaza, designed to celebrate the monarchy, provided the perfect open theatre for its demise. Renamed the Place de la Révolution, it was repurposed as the primary execution site where Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette met the guillotine. The Theatre of Nicolet, thriving on the Boulevard du Temple by 1786, was built for popular, unpretentious entertainment. Its purpose was to provide a psychological release for the masses. Through dazzling acrobatics, bawdy comedies, and loud spectacles, it offered the common Parisian a brief, joyous escape from the grueling reality of 18th-century survival. When the starving rioters sacked the home of industrialist Jean-Baptiste Réveillon in 1789, they did not just attack a man, they attacked a system built into the very masonry of Paris. The 18th century was a collision of eras. The medieval fortresses of the Temple and Bastille, the Renaissance administration of the Hôtel de Ville, The 17th century financial bridges and the 18th century royal plazas were all suddenly forced to interact in a bloody struggle for the future. Paris was an architectural ledger of absolute power, and in the span of a single violent decade, the people of France violently rewrote it,